My name is Ayan Malik, and this is not just a story about being mocked. It's a story about silence, patience, and a truth hidden where no one thought to look. That night was my brother Samir Malik's engagement. The banquet hall in Islamabad was glowing with crystal lights, soft music, and people dressed in elegance. Laughter echoed everywhere, but none of it felt real to me. I stood quietly near a corner, wearing a simple gray suit and an old watch that had seen better days. I didn't belong to the spotlight, and everyone there made sure I knew it. Samir was the pride of our family, the successful CEO of Malik Group of companies, confident, charming, admired by relatives and strangers alike. Cameras followed him as if he owned the world. And maybe, in their eyes, he did. I was just Ayan, the quiet brother, the one people spoke about in low voices, the one who never made it. My mother leaned toward me and whispered that I should smile because people were watching. I smiled for her, but inside my chest, something heavy shifted. I had learned long ago how to hide emotions behind calm eyes. Samir stood on stage with his fiancée, Hira. Applause filled the hall as flashes of cameras lit up their faces. Around me, I heard whispers slipping through the noise. They talked about Samir's success, his future, his achievements. Then their voices turned toward me. They compared us. They laughed softly. They wondered what went wrong with me. Some of Samir's friends walked over, holding drinks and confidence. They asked what I was doing these days, whether I had a job, a business, or if I was still figuring life out. I answered calmly, saying I did a little work here and there. They smiled, exchanged looks, and laughed as if my answer confirmed everything they already believed. Then Samir picked up the microphone. He thanked everyone for coming, praised his fiancée, and spoke about family. Suddenly, his eyes found me in the crowd. He mentioned my name, said I had always been a dreamer, said I still hadn't settled in life. The hall laughed, not loudly, but enough. Enough to hurt. He smiled and added that every family has someone who blooms late. In that moment, my hands clenched without me realizing it. My mother looked down. No one defended me. No one needed to. They all agreed silently. What they didn't know was that while they were laughing, my mind was replaying years of work they had never seen, nights without sleep, meetings held under different names, documents signed without applause, money invested quietly, carefully, strategically. No one there knew that most of Malik Group didn't truly belong to Samir. They didn't know that the majority ownership was legally mine, that the company existed because I built it from the shadows, that Samir was only the face they trusted and admired. Even Samir didn't know. To him, there was just a silent investor who believed in him and funded everything. That silent investor was standing in the corner being laughed at. When the applause returned to the stage, I turned and walked out of the hall without a word. Behind me, I heard Samir say that I always created drama. I smiled to myself. Because I wasn't creating drama, I was preparing the truth. The next morning, the house felt unusually quiet, the kind of silence that follows a storm when everything looks normal but nothing really is. I sat at the dining table, stirring my tea slowly, replaying the previous night in my head. Samir's laughter, the guests' whispers, the way everyone had already decided who I was without ever asking. Samir walked in, phone in hand, still riding the high of his engagement. He barely looked at me as he grabbed a cup of coffee. He said the investors were impressed, that the company was growing faster than expected, that big things were coming. I listened quietly. I always did. He spoke about Malik Group as if it were his kingdom, built by his vision and hard work alone. I let him talk. Correcting him would have been too easy. And too soon. Later that day, I drove to a part of the city no one in my family ever visited, a glass building with no flashy sign, no branding outside. Inside, people stood up the moment they saw me, not because of my clothes, not because of my name, but because they knew exactly who I was. In the conference room, files were already laid out, financial reports, legal documents, expansion plans, numbers that didn't lie. The CFO spoke first. He said the board wanted clarity before the next phase, the overseas merger, the restructuring, the risk assessment. I nodded and asked one simple question. How exposed was Samir? The room went quiet. They told me the truth. If the funding stopped, if ownership shifted, if signatures were withdrawn, the entire structure would tremble. Not collapse immediately, but enough to shake confidence. That was all I needed to hear. That evening my phone buzzed, a message from Samir. He wanted to meet, said we should talk like brothers. We met at a cafe. He spoke casually at first, about wedding plans, about responsibilities. Then his tone changed. He said people were talking, that I had left the engagement early, that it looked bad. He suggested I should try harder, dress better, do something with my life, for the family's image. I watched him carefully. The confidence in his voice wasn't his own. It was borrowed, built on something he didn't truly understand. I told him not to worry, that everything would be handled. He smiled, relieved. He always did when he thought I was agreeing. That night, I made a call I had been postponing for years. To the legal advisor who had set everything up in the beginning, I told him to prepare the documents, not to reveal anything yet, just to be ready. The reveal had to be timed perfectly, not out of anger, but precision, because humiliation fades, but realization stays forever. And Samir was about to realize that the brother he laughed at had been holding the ground beneath his feet all along. Days passed, and the excitement around Samir's engagement slowly turned into pressure. Wedding preparations were expensive, expectations were high, and Malik Group was entering a phase where every decision mattered. Samir thrived on attention, but pressure was something he had never handled alone. He didn't realize how much of it I had been absorbing for years. One evening, he came to my room for the first time in months. He didn't knock. He never did. He sat on the chair across from me and sighed heavily, as if the weight of the world had suddenly landed on his shoulders. He said the board was asking too many questions, that the overseas merger was moving slower than expected, that investors wanted reassurance. He laughed it off, but his eyes didn't match his tone. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, he asked me what I thought. I told him everything would be fine, that he should trust the process. He nodded, comforted by my calm. He always mistook my silence for ignorance. The next week, the pressure turned into cracks. A key investor delayed funding. A partner requested revised terms. Emails piled up. Meetings stretched longer. Samir started snapping at people, losing the charm that once made him untouchable. At home, the atmosphere changed too. Relatives who once praised Samir now whispered about stress and responsibility. My mother noticed the shift but said nothing. She had learned, like me, to observe quietly. I returned to the glass building again. This time, the room felt heavier. I asked for updated reports. The numbers were clear. The company was stable, but only because I was still there, unseen, unsigned, unquestioned. I gave a single instruction. No new funds would move without my approval. No agreements would be finalized without my signature. Nothing dramatic happened that day. And that was the most unsettling part. Samir called me late at night. His voice was tighter now. He asked if I knew anything about delays, if I had heard rumors, if something was wrong. I told him sometimes growth feels like resistance before it becomes strength. He thanked me, unaware of how close he was to the edge. At the end of that call, I looked at the folder on my desk. Inside were documents that could change everything: ownership structures, trust disclosures, board resolutions. The truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was waiting. And the longer Samir stayed in the dark, the harder the light was going to hit. The first real crack appeared on a Monday morning. Samir arrived at the office expecting another routine board meeting. Instead, he found unfamiliar faces in the conference room. Legal consultants, senior advisors, people who didn't smile easily. He felt it immediately, even if he didn't understand it yet. The meeting began with numbers, calm voices, carefully chosen words. The overseas merger was officially on hold. Risk exposure had increased. Certain approvals were pending. Samir pushed back, confidently at first. He spoke about vision, timelines, growth. But the room didn't move with him the way it used to. Someone asked a simple question: who was authorizing the next phase of funding? Silence followed. Samir glanced at the CFO, expecting support. Instead, the CFO looked down at the table. That was the moment confusion turned into unease. Later that day, Samir called me repeatedly. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Some lessons can't be taught with words. At home that night, he finally confronted me. His confidence was thinner now, his voice sharper. He asked me directly if I knew anything, if I was involved in what was happening, if someone was trying to sabotage him. I looked at him and told him that no one was sabotaging anything, that structures were simply being respected. He laughed nervously and said I wouldn't understand. That business was complicated. I agreed with him. 2 days later, the board sent an official notice, a request for clarification regarding ownership, voting rights, and trust authority. Legal language, polite, dangerous. Samir stormed into my room, holding the letter in his hand. His hands were shaking now. He asked me who the silent investor was. For the first time in years, I didn't look away. I told him the truth doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it waits until you're ready to hear it. He demanded answers, raised his voice, accused me of hiding things, of enjoying his struggle. I stayed calm. I had practiced this moment in my head more times than I could count. I told him there was a reason I never chased attention, a reason I stayed in the background, a reason I never argued when he laughed, because power doesn't announce itself, it reveals itself, and the reveal had already begun. Samir didn't sleep that night. I knew because neither did I. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that presses against your chest, making every breath feel louder than it should. Around 3 a.m, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, uncertain, the sound of someone whose confidence had finally abandoned him. He stopped outside my door. For a long moment, he didn't knock. Then he did. Softly. That alone told me everything. When I opened the door, he looked different. Not broken yet, but shaken. His eyes were red, his shirt wrinkled, his posture no longer straight. This wasn't the Samir who stood on stage at his engagement, laughing while the room laughed with him. He asked if we could talk. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat on the edge of the bed like a guest, not like the man who once owned every room he entered. He started speaking fast, words tumbling over each other. He said the board was asking questions he couldn't answer, that lawyers were suddenly involved, that decisions were being delayed without explanation. He said it felt like the ground was moving under him. Then he stopped and finally asked the question he had been avoiding. He asked me who I really was. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't want to, but because this moment deserved honesty without rush. I told him a story instead. About years ago when our father fell sick, when bills piled up, when dreams became responsibilities, when someone had to step back so another could step forward. I told him how I chose silence, how I learned the business from the inside, not the spotlight, how I built relationships quietly, earned trust slowly, and invested without my name ever appearing in headlines. He listened without interrupting. For once, I told him about the trust, about the structure, about the documents he had never read because he never needed to. I told him that Malik Group wasn't taken from him. It was never his alone to begin with. His face drained of color. He stood up, pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. He said this couldn't be true, that he would have known, that someone would have told him. I told him people only see what they're shown. He laughed then. Not with humor, more like disbelief mixed with fear. He said all those years, all those meetings, all those achievements, were they real? I told him they were real, but they were shared, and he had forgotten that success doesn't mean ownership. The next morning, everything moved faster. Samir was called into an emergency board meeting. This time, I was already there when he arrived, sitting at the head of the table. Calm, prepared, familiar to everyone else in the room. When he saw me, he froze. The chairman greeted me first, addressed me by my full name, thanked me for attending, spoke to me as if this were normal, because to them, it was. Samir looked around, searching for support. He didn't find any. Not because they hated him, but because the truth was finally standing in front of him, and it had paperwork. The meeting was professional, no shouting, no drama, just facts. Percentages, authority, signatures. I didn't take his position. I didn't need to. I clarified roles. I restructured decision rights. I protected the company from collapsing under ego. I let Samir remain CEO. That shocked him more than anything else. After the meeting, he followed me out. His voice was low now, controlled. He asked why I didn't destroy him when I had the chance. I told him destruction was never the goal. Respect was. That evening, the family gathered. Samir told them everything. Not perfectly, not proudly, but honestly. My mother cried, not because of the money or the company, but because she finally understood why I had always stayed quiet. Relatives who once mocked me avoided my eyes, not out of shame, but confusion. They didn't know how to treat me anymore. And I didn't help them, I stayed the same. Later that night, Samir came to me again. This time, he apologized, not dramatically, not perfectly, but sincerely. He said he had mistaken silence for weakness, that he had enjoyed the applause without asking who built the stage. I accepted his apology. Not because he deserved it, but because I no longer needed his validation. The next day, news broke quietly. A restructuring, a clarification of ownership, no scandal, no headlines screaming betrayal, just a subtle shift in power that only those who mattered truly understood. And as for the people who laughed at me that night, they stopped laughing, because the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates, and I had been underestimated for a very long time. Life didn't change overnight after that reveal. It slowed down instead, like a river after a storm, still powerful, but quieter on the surface. That's something people never understand about power. Once you truly have it, you don't need to prove it every minute. Samir became different, not weaker, just more careful. He still went to the office every day, still chaired meetings, still spoke with confidence. But now, before making decisions, he paused. Sometimes he looked at me, sometimes he didn't. Either way, the pause was there. And that pause was new. At home, the family treated me differently, though they tried to hide it. My mother would ask my opinion more often. My father, who had once worried silently about both of us, now watched me with a mix of pride and regret. Pride for what I had built, regret for not seeing it sooner. Relatives stopped making jokes. Instead, they made excuses. They said they had always known I was smart, that I was the quiet type. I didn't correct them. I didn't need their rewritten memories. One evening, Samir asked me to join him for dinner outside. Just the two of us. No family, no business talk. At least that's what he said. We sat at a small restaurant far from the places he usually chose, somewhere modest, somewhere real. Halfway through the meal, he admitted something he had never said before. He said he had always lived under pressure, the pressure to succeed, to impress, to be admired. He said when people compared us, it made him feel bigger, stronger, and he hated himself for that. I listened. He said losing control, even partially, terrified him. Not because of money, but because it forced him to see himself clearly, without applause. I told him clarity is uncomfortable, but it's also freeing. For the first time in years, we talked like brothers, not competitors, not shadows of each other, but equals with different strengths. At the office, the company began to stabilize in a healthier way. Decisions became smarter. Risks were calculated, not rushed. People stopped chasing quick praise and started focusing on long-term growth. The culture shifted, subtly but surely. Some executives tried to flatter me now. I shut that down quickly. I told them the same thing I always believed. Titles don't impress me. Results do. One afternoon, I walked past the same conference room where Samir once stood confidently, believing everything beneath him was solid. I remembered that engagement night, the laughter, the whispers, the way I walked out without saying a word. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt distance, not from my brother, but from the version of myself that needed to be seen. Because the truth is, the real victory wasn't revealing that I owned the company. The real victory was realizing I didn't need to reveal anything at all to know my worth, and that was the moment I finally felt free.